Why is she here? Because this night was never really yours. She is not even on the guest list. She does not need an invitation anymore.
The easiest way to erase someone is to believe they were never important. Nathan Whitmore learned that lesson the night it was too late. The ballroom of the Grand Crescent Hotel shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most American homes. Waiters moved across polished marble floors carrying silver trays filled with champagne. Cameras flashed. Investors laughed. Politicians shook hands. The annual Whitmore Foundation Gala had become one of the most prestigious events in New York, and every guest understood one thing: if your name was on Nathan Whitmore's list, you mattered. If it wasn't, you didn't. Standing near the entrance, Nathan adjusted the cuff of his custom tuxedo and reviewed the final guest registry on a tablet. Rows of influential names scrolled beneath his fingertips. CEOs. Senators. Media executives. Athletes. The people who shaped headlines. Then he paused. One name remained. Evelyn Carter. His former wife. For a brief second, her name sat quietly among the others. Nathan stared at it. The corners of his mouth lifted slightly. Then, with a single tap, he deleted it. Gone. No announcement. No argument. No explanation. Just a blank space where her name had been. The event coordinator hesitated. "Mr. Whitmore, are you sure?" Nathan handed back the tablet. Completely. Around him, nobody questioned the decision. Why would they? 3 years had passed since the divorce. 3 years since Evelyn had disappeared from the circles that once welcomed her. Most people barely mentioned her anymore. Some had forgotten her entirely. Others remembered only enough to whisper that she hadn't managed to keep up after the marriage ended. Nathan preferred it that way. Tonight was supposed to celebrate success, influence, and power. There was no place for ghosts. Outside, luxury vehicles continued arriving beneath the glow of golden lights. Guests stepped onto the red carpet, smiling for photographers. Names were checked. Invitations scanned. Doors opened. The evening moved forward with perfect precision. Nathan watched it all with quiet satisfaction. Every detail reflected the empire he had built. Every conversation seemed to orbit around him. Every spotlight pointed in his direction. Yet somewhere beyond the cameras and beyond the laughter, a cold wind moved through the city streets. And while Nathan enjoyed the feeling of complete control, he failed to notice the one thing that mattered. A deleted name does not always stay erased. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it grows stronger in silence. And sometimes, the person removed from the guest list becomes the reason nobody remembers who wrote the list in the first place. 3 years earlier, before the cameras followed Nathan Whitmore and before his name appeared on magazine covers, success had lived inside a much smaller room. It was a rented office above a dry cleaner in downtown Manhattan, barely 800 square feet, with stained carpet, flickering fluorescent lights, and a coffee machine that worked only when someone kicked the side of it. Back then, nobody lined up to meet Nathan. Nobody invited him to exclusive conferences. Nobody believed his company would survive its first year. But there was one person who never doubted him. Evelyn Carter sat across from him night after night at a scratched wooden desk covered with spreadsheets, legal documents, and handwritten notes. While Nathan spoke confidently about the future, Evelyn quietly built the foundation beneath his dreams. She reviewed contracts. She negotiated with vendors. She reorganized budgets when money ran low. More than once, she stayed awake until sunrise correcting problems nobody else even knew existed. The company's first successful proposal carried Nathan's signature, but many of the ideas inside had been written in Evelyn's careful handwriting days before. She never asked for recognition. She never demanded credit. When investors complimented Nathan's vision, Evelyn simply smiled from the back of the room. When reporters requested interviews, Nathan stepped in front of the cameras while Evelyn remained invisible behind them. At first, it did not matter. They were partners. husband and wife. His victories felt like hers. Every milestone belonged to both of them. Then the company began to grow. New executives arrived. Expensive offices replaced the cramped workspace. Luxury cars appeared. Invitations followed. Somewhere between private jets and board meetings, people stopped asking who Evelyn was. Nathan stopped correcting them. The change happened gradually, almost too slowly to notice. During one charity dinner, an investor mistakenly assumed Evelyn was part of the event staff. Nathan laughed politely and moved the conversation forward. He never introduced her. Another evening, a business journalist referred to Nathan as a self-made billionaire. Evelyn heard the phrase from across the room. Nathan heard it too. He said nothing. Those moments were small. Easy to dismiss. Yet they accumulated like dust on forgotten shelves. By the time the company reached international success, the story had been rewritten. Nathan became the genius. Nathan became the architect. Nathan became the empire. And Evelyn became a footnote. Looking back, the most remarkable thing was not how much she had given him. It was how completely the world had forgotten she was there when everything began. The divorce became one of those stories people discussed over expensive dinners and forgot by the next season. News outlets framed it as a clean separation between two successful adults. Business magazines focused on Nathan Whitmore's future. Analysts speculated about the next stage of his growing empire. Very few people asked what would happen to Evelyn Carter. Fewer still waited for an answer. On the morning the settlement was finalized, rain covered the city in a dull gray haze. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse holding umbrellas against the wind. Camera crews stood ready, hoping for dramatic statements or emotional confrontations. Instead, they received silence. Nathan exited first, surrounded by attorneys and advisors. Questions followed him down the courthouse steps. What was next for Whitmore Industries? Would the company continue expanding internationally? Was he planning new acquisitions? Nathan answered with calm confidence. He looked exactly like the man the public expected him to be. Successful. Untouchable. Certain of his future. Several minutes later, Evelyn stepped through the same doors alone. No entourage. No publicist. No prepared statement. The flashing cameras turned toward her. Reporters called her name. She paused briefly at the top of the steps, her hand resting against the railing polished smooth by decades of use. For a moment, she seemed smaller than the headlines that surrounded her. Then she simply continued walking. Someone shouted a question about the divorce. Another asked whether she regretted supporting Nathan's career. A third wondered how she planned to maintain her lifestyle. Evelyn never answered. She entered a waiting taxi and disappeared into traffic. The public interpreted her silence however they wished. Some assumed she had lost everything. Others believed she lacked the experience to succeed on her own. A few quietly suggested that Nathan had carried the marriage all along. Those assumptions spread because nobody challenged them. Not even Evelyn. Weeks later, invitations continued arriving at Nathan's penthouse. Investors wanted meetings. Television hosts requested interviews. Industry leaders competed for his attention. Meanwhile, Evelyn packed boxes inside a nearly empty apartment overlooking a narrow side street. Framed photographs were wrapped in newspaper and placed into storage containers. Awards bearing Nathan's name remained untouched on shelves. In one corner sat an old notebook filled with business plans, calculations, and ideas written years earlier. She opened it briefly. The pages carried traces of late nights and forgotten sacrifices. Then she closed it again. There was no bitterness in the gesture. Only acceptance. Outside her window, life continued moving forward. Car horns echoed through the afternoon. Pedestrians hurried along wet sidewalks. Across the city, Nathan celebrated freedom. Across the city, the world applauded his success. And across the city, the woman who had helped build it all quietly walked away without taking credit for any of it. The first year after the divorce was the quietest year of Evelyn Carter's adult life. Nobody recognized her in the grocery store. Nobody requested interviews. Nobody invited her to charity galas or executive retreats. The silence that once felt unfamiliar slowly became a kind of freedom. She rented a modest apartment in a restored brick building nearly 20 miles from the neighborhoods where she and Nathan had once lived. The view from her window was not a skyline filled with glass towers. It was a row of maple trees lining a quiet street where people walked their dogs every morning before work. For the first time in years, her schedule belonged entirely to her. Every day began before sunrise. She would carry a notebook to a small coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment and sit near the front window as the city slowly woke around her. The owner learned her name. The baristas remembered her order. Nobody cared about billion-dollar companies or magazine rankings. Conversations centered around families, school events, and local news. At first, the simplicity felt strange. Then it felt honest. Evelyn spent hours studying trends, researching nonprofit organizations, and reviewing ideas she had abandoned years earlier while helping build Nathan's empire. Many of those forgotten concepts filled entire notebooks stacked across her kitchen table. Looking at them now, she realized something surprising. The skills had never disappeared. The intelligence had never disappeared. The ambition had never disappeared. Only the spotlight had. Month after month, she worked quietly. She met community leaders. She volunteered with educational programs. She listened more than she spoke. When she saw problems, she looked for solutions. When she discovered opportunities, she developed plans. Nobody announced her progress. Nobody applauded the effort. Yet the work continued. Slowly, relationships formed. Small projects became larger initiatives. One successful partnership led to another. Then another. The process lacked the glamour Nathan's world celebrated, but it possessed something far more durable. Purpose. By the beginning of the 3rd year, Evelyn had become known within a growing network of educators, donors, and nonprofit leaders. Most of them had no idea she was once married to one of the country's most famous businessmen. She preferred it that way. Her reputation developed independently of his. One rainy afternoon, she returned home carrying a folder filled with proposals and paused beside a mirror near the entrance. For a moment, she studied her reflection. The woman staring back looked different than the person who had walked out of the courthouse years earlier. Not because of wealth. Not because of status. Because confidence had returned. Quietly. Gradually. Without permission from anyone. Across the city, Nathan Whitmore continued building an empire. Across the city, Evelyn Carter was building something else entirely. And neither of them yet understood which foundation would ultimately prove stronger. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning inside an ordinary white envelope. No gold lettering. No corporate logo. No indication that it would change the course of Evelyn Carter's future. She found it among utility bills and community newsletters stacked beside her apartment door. At first, she almost overlooked it. The return address belonged to a nonprofit leadership conference being held in Chicago. One of the largest philanthropic gatherings in the country. Hundreds of organizations would attend. Donors, educators, foundation directors, and business leaders would spend 3 days discussing projects designed to improve communities across America. Evelyn had submitted a proposal months earlier and nearly forgotten about it. Inside the envelope was a simple letter requesting her presence as a featured speaker. 2 weeks later, she found herself standing in a hotel conference center overlooking Lake Michigan. The ballroom lacked the extravagance of Billionaire galas. There were no flashing cameras or celebrity guests. Instead, conversations filled the room with something far more meaningful. Ideas. People discussing how to solve problems rather than how to impress each other. Evelyn felt comfortable there. During her presentation, she spoke about educational access, local partnerships, and sustainable community investment. She explained concepts clearly and confidently. The audience listened carefully. When she finished, the applause felt genuine. Not because of status. Because of substance. As attendees gathered afterward, one man remained seated near the back of the room. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, dressed in a navy suit without any visible signs of wealth or importance. While others introduced themselves quickly before moving on, he waited patiently until the crowd thinned. Then he approached. "You built those models yourself?" he asked. Evelyn nodded. "Most of them." The man smiled slightly. "I thought so." His name was Alexander Hayes. The introduction lasted less than a minute. He asked a few thoughtful questions. She answered them. Nothing about the conversation seemed remarkable. Yet there was something unusual in the way he listened. He paid attention to details others ignored. He understood the long-term strategy behind her ideas almost immediately. Before leaving, he handed her a business card. No title appeared beneath his name. No accomplishments. Just a phone number and an email address. Months passed before they spoke again. Then another invitation arrived. Then another meeting. Alexander never offered favors. He never treated Evelyn like someone who needed rescuing. Instead, he challenged her assumptions, introduced her to capable people, and encouraged her to think bigger than she ever had before. What Evelyn did not know was that Alexander Hayes had spent years quietly funding some of the most influential charitable initiatives in the world. And after their first conversation in Chicago, he became deeply interested in a question nobody else seemed willing to ask. What could Evelyn Carter accomplish if the world finally saw what she was truly capable of? By the beginning of autumn, something unusual was happening across the nonprofit world. Organizations that had struggled for years were suddenly receiving support. Scholarship programs expanded. Community centers reopened. Educational initiatives gained funding large enough to transform entire neighborhoods. Yet nobody seemed to know where the money was coming from. Reporters tried tracing the source. Industry experts made guesses. Some believed it was a coalition of wealthy donors working together behind the scenes. Others suspected a major corporation had quietly launched a new charitable division. The truth remained hidden. Every contribution flowed through a newly established organization called the Horizon Foundation. The foundation avoided publicity. Its executives rarely appeared at events. Interviews were politely declined. Public records revealed almost nothing about the leadership structure. The mystery only increased public fascination. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued her work exactly as before. Her mornings still began at the neighborhood coffee shop. Her afternoons remained filled with meetings, planning sessions, and community visits. The difference was scale. Projects that once affected hundreds of people now reached thousands. Programs that once operated within a single city began spreading across multiple states. Whenever journalists requested comments, she redirected attention toward the organizations doing the work rather than the individuals supporting it. Recognition had never been her goal. One afternoon, Evelyn met Alexander Hayes inside a quiet conference room overlooking the Hudson River. Several reports lay open across the polished table. Numbers, projections, and impact assessments filled the pages. Alexander reviewed them carefully before setting down his pen. "The results are exceeding expectations," he said. Evelyn glanced toward the window where sunlight reflected off the water below. "The communities are doing the work. We are simply helping them continue." Alexander smiled. It was one of the reasons he respected her. Most people measured success through visibility. Evelyn measured it through outcomes. A few moments later, Alexander slid another document across the table. It contained information about an upcoming event. The annual Whitmore Foundation Gala. One of the most anticipated charity gatherings in the country. Evelyn recognized the name immediately. Her eyes remained calm. Alexander studied her reaction. The organizers are preparing a major announcement, he said. The largest philanthropic recognition award they have ever presented. Evelyn closed the folder. And why are you showing me this? Alexander leaned back slightly. Because the board wants to honor the anonymous founder behind Horizon Foundation. For the first time in the conversation, silence settled between them. Outside the glass walls, the city continued moving beneath bright afternoon skies. Inside, Evelyn stared at the invitation packet resting on the table. 3 years earlier, she had walked away from a world obsessed with status. Now that same world was unknowingly preparing to celebrate the very woman it had forgotten. Neither Nathan Whitmore nor the guests filling his future ballroom had any idea what was coming. But the moment was approaching faster than any of them realized. The Grand Crescent Hotel glowed against the Manhattan skyline like a monument to prestige. Limousines lined the entrance. Photographers crowded behind velvet barriers. Inside, crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across marble floors polished to a mirror shine. The annual Whitmore Foundation Gala had officially begun. Nathan Whitmore moved through the ballroom with practiced confidence, greeting donors and executives as if he personally owned every conversation in the room. In many ways, he did. The event carried his name. The foundation carried his influence. The evening had become another reminder of how far he had risen. Around him, guests discussed one topic more than any other. The mystery surrounding Horizon Foundation. Nobody knew who had funded so many transformative projects across the country. Rumors spread from table to table. Some believed the founder was a retired billionaire. Others guessed a powerful family office operating in secret. Nathan listened with mild curiosity but little concern. Whoever the anonymous donor was, tonight's recognition would ultimately strengthen the charitable community he already dominated. Near the main entrance, event staff continued checking guests against the official registry. Every arrival passed through the same process. Names verified. Invitations confirmed. Doors opened. Then, shortly after 8 o'clock, something unexpected happened. A quiet ripple moved through the reception area. Conversation slowed. Several guests turned toward the entrance. Then more followed. One by one, heads began turning across the room. Nathan noticed the change immediately. He frowned slightly and glanced toward the doors. For a brief moment, he could not understand what he was seeing. Standing beneath the golden lights was Evelyn Carter. 3 years had passed since their divorce, yet she carried herself with a calm confidence he did not remember. She wore a simple black evening gown that needed no extravagant details to command attention. There were no cameras surrounding her. No dramatic announcement. No effort to impress anyone. She simply walked forward. The irony escaped nobody except Nathan. The same woman whose name had been removed from the guest list was now entering the ballroom anyway. Event staff did not stop her. In fact, several greeted her respectfully. Nathan felt a sudden tension settle across his shoulders. It made no sense. He had personally deleted her name. Yet there she was. Guests whispered quietly. Some recognized her immediately. Others struggled to place the face they had not seen in years. Evelyn acknowledged no one beyond a polite smile. She moved through the ballroom with measured composure, completely unaffected by the attention gathering around her. Across the room, Alexander Hayes entered moments later. Unlike Evelyn, many people recognized him instantly. Conversation stopped again. Nathan's expression tightened. Because if Alexander Hayes was here tonight, then this evening was about to become far more important than anyone had anticipated. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as guests found their seats. Conversations faded into a low murmur. At the front of the room, a massive screen illuminated the stage in soft gold light. Nathan Whitmore sat near the center beside board members, major donors, and public figures. Although he maintained a composed expression, his attention kept drifting toward Evelyn. She sat several tables away, calm and unreadable. Alexander Hayes occupied the seat beside her. That detail alone had already unsettled half the room. Then the evening's final presentation began. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and welcomed the audience. A brief video played across the screen. Images appeared of schools receiving new technology, students earning scholarships, community centers opening their doors, and neighborhoods transformed through investment and opportunity. The audience watched attentively. Many recognized the projects. Few understood they all shared the same source of support. When the video ended, the room erupted into applause. The presenter smiled and adjusted the microphone. "Tonight," he said, "we recognize an individual whose vision has quietly impacted countless lives across this country." The ballroom fell silent again. Nathan leaned forward slightly. Around him, guests exchanged curious glances. The presenter continued. For years, this individual declined interviews, rejected publicity, and insisted that recognition belonged to the communities doing the work rather than the person funding it. A new slide appeared on the screen behind him. Horizon Foundation. The name alone triggered whispers throughout the room. The mystery was finally about to end. "Many of you have spent years wondering who stood behind this organization," the presenter said. "Tonight, that question receives its answer." At that exact moment, Alexander Hayes rose from his seat. Every eye in the ballroom followed him. The room became so quiet that the soft clink of silverware sounded unusually loud. Alexander turned toward Evelyn and offered his hand. She looked at him briefly before standing. The presenter smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in recognizing the founder of Horizon Foundation, Ms. Evelyn Carter." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The announcement seemed too unexpected to process. Nathan's expression froze completely. Several guests stared at Evelyn as if seeing her for the first time. Then Alexander began applauding. One board member stood. Then another. A donor rose from his chair. Across the ballroom, more guests followed. Within seconds, an entire hall filled with influential leaders was standing. Applause thundered beneath the crystal chandeliers. The sound echoed against marble walls and gold ceilings. Nathan remained seated, unable to hide the disbelief in his eyes. 3 years earlier, the world had forgotten Evelyn Carter. Tonight, the same world rose to honor her. She had not demanded attention. She had not defended herself. She had not chased recognition. Yet somehow recognition had found her anyway. And as the applause continued growing louder, one truth became impossible to ignore. The woman many believed had lost everything had quietly become the most respected person in the room. The applause continued long after Evelyn reached the stage. Standing beneath the crystal chandeliers, she accepted the award with the same quiet composure that had carried her through every chapter of her journey. The gold plaque reflected the ballroom lights as the audience remained on its feet. Faces that once overlooked her now watched with admiration. Leaders, philanthropists, executives, and public officials all recognized the significance of the moment. Yet Evelyn seemed entirely untouched by the attention. She did not raise the award triumphantly. She did not search the room for validation. She simply stood there, calm and steady, as though the applause belonged to the communities she had helped rather than to herself. When the room finally settled, the master of ceremonies invited her to speak. Evelyn stepped toward the microphone. For a brief moment, the ballroom became completely silent. Nathan Whitmore sat motionless among the crowd. Years earlier, he had become accustomed to hearing people praise him. Tonight, for the first time in a very long time, he was listening instead. Evelyn glanced across the audience before speaking. Every opportunity represented by this award belongs to people who refused to give up when circumstances told them they should. Her voice was steady and warm. Teachers who stayed late. Volunteers who showed up. Families who kept believing. Community leaders who continued building when nobody was watching. She paused. Real change rarely begins on a stage. It begins quietly. One decision at a time. The audience listened carefully. There was no bitterness. No reference to past disappointments. No attempt to settle old scores. The speech lasted only a few minutes. Yet every word carried more weight than the dramatic confrontations people often expected. When she finished, another wave of applause filled the ballroom. This time even stronger than before. As guests gathered afterward, many approached Evelyn with congratulations. Others requested meetings and partnerships. Reporters waited near the exits hoping for interviews. Through it all, she remained gracious but measured. Across the room, Nathan watched the evening unfold. For years he had believed influence came from being seen. Evelyn had proven something different. Influence came from creating value so meaningful that recognition arrived on its own. Eventually, as the gala drew to a close, Evelyn made her way toward the exit. Alexander Hayes walked beside her. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass entrance. Behind them, conversations continued late into the evening. Before stepping outside, Evelyn glanced briefly toward the stage. Earlier that night, her name had appeared across the massive screen for everyone to see. The same name that had once been erased with a single tap. Now it was impossible to ignore. She smiled softly and continued forward without looking back. Because she had never returned to reclaim the past. She had returned to prove she no longer needed it. She did not win him back. She won herself. And in the end, that was the victory nobody could ever take away.